The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is now 7.5 after 8. We'll welcome you to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, this morning, looking at the ANC's policy conference, it gets underway in Midrand this morning. No less than 13 policy discussion documents will be discussed there over the next 4 days ahead of the ANC's National Elective Conference in December. Let's look, though, at the issues of economy. Will the ANC's policy conference, for instance, held a fresh approach towards economic development in this country? And to talk to us about those matters, let me welcome from our Midrand studios there, member of the ANC's National Executive Committee as well as a member of the Economic Transformation Committee, Mr. Ino Kotongwana. Mr. Kotongwana, good morning.
Good morning, Golan.
Thank you very much for your time. Also joining us from our Midrand studios is Lebohang Pheko, policy and economic analyst. Good morning to you, Lebohang.
Hi, Golan.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I should start with you, Lebohang, here, because there seems to be a sense, at least from a lot of analysts that have spoken on this matter, that there will be a lot of focus on the economic policies this time, a lot more than has ever happened in the ANC's conferences after 1994.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd beg to agree, mainly because of the pronouncements that have been made around the second transition, which speak to nationalization, which speak to issues of land redistribution, but also framed against some concerns around the constitutionality and how the constitution is going to be able to embed a notion of economic justice and economic equity. Certainly, certain factions of the ANC have been useful, if albeit rather disruptive, in the manner in which they've managed to bring to the fore some very critical and important key issues around redistribution and around the way in which the resources of this country have been managed over the last few years. And perhaps it's a moment to then begin to coalesce some of the deficiencies and the slightly incoherent or the lack of coherence and continuity in the various policy instruments that have been formulated over the past few years.
That's a very important and interesting point, and I'm going to come to you, Mr. Kotongwana, in a second, because I would like us to look at the backdrop within which this conference is happening. Do you think that the ANC has frankly and honestly discussed its successes and failures over the past 18 years in as far as economic policy is concerned?
I think in a fragmented kind of way, and I think that sometimes we see the successes and the failures in the way which we are able to then move on to the next policy instrument, and that perhaps may be a signal that particular instruments have not been as effective as was originally anticipated. But I think that in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and moments and encounters for cohesive and collective reflection, we haven't had a moment like this at this scale with the stakes as high as this in the last few years. And there've been these kind of occasions tend to happen in silos. So you'll have something, a job summit, you'll have the climate summit, you'll have a youth summit, you'll have different occasions which speak to the same issues but coming from completely different angles. This may be the first opportunity that we've had in a while to actually coalesce and have all of these conversations more or less under one roof.
Mr. Kotongwana, and then time for you to come in, because firstly, I would like to know the ANC's assessment of the implementation of the economic policies over the past 18 years.
Look, Golan, over the past 18 years, there's no doubt that the ANC has steered the ship correctly, but there has been moments which are beyond our control. I mean, just about 3 years in government, we saw the Asian crisis, which had serious impact on ourselves. But from 2000 onwards, we've seen the ANC managing the economy and growth and creating about 2 million jobs. But against that backdrop, we have had the global meltdown, which has reversed such gains, and we saw the economy losing about another 1 million jobs. So, yes, we have managed to steer the ship correctly. There has been an enduring problem of unemployment and poverty, which, if you look at all other indicators, have performed well, but we still have got a challenge of unemployment, poverty and inequality.
And then if you look at all other indicators, which ones would you be referring to? Because those are critical indicators, poverty, inequality and unemployment.
Look, I mean, the social, I mean, in GDP growth and other areas, we can see despite the global, I mean, were it not for the global meltdown, we've been performing very well. We've been seeing the economy growing to about 4.5 and 5%. So, yes, beginning to make an impact on unemployment, as I've indicated. We create about 2 million jobs reversed by the global meltdown.
And again, let me read some emails, one or two here, so that perhaps I can set the scene about what people feel and how people feel about these discussions. There's an email that came through from Reg Ngosi, who says the debate in South Africa, and indeed at the ANC policy conference, should be about the failed economic model we followed since 1993. The outcomes of this neoliberal economic policy model are unambiguous. One, high unemployment, poverty, and high inequality. These outcomes will never end unless we change the economic model. This economic model produces fictitious economic growth of 8.5% in the financial sector between 1994 and 2008, while 3.5% in the rest of the economy. Who gained? It's the unproductive finance sector, the real cause of the global economic crisis. Until we completely shift policy, poverty, inequality, etc., we will increase and the revolution will follow. Regards, Reg Ngosi on email. Again, I would like you to respond to this, Mr. Kotongwana, because you assert the opposite of what Reg is saying.
No, I mean the mere assertion of an ideological baggage of saying there's a neoliberal stance without saying what are the elements of that neoliberal stance which need to be changed. It's difficult to deal with that kind of question, and really it's purely an assertion which. Unless someone, explains what is meant by that. And we're agreed. I mean, there's consensus that a major challenge facing this economy is unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And everybody in this meeting, part of our focus is how to deal with that question.
But I think there's a contradiction perhaps on the point of departure here, because you say, well, you've done well over the past 18 years. But I was talking to Mr. Mantashe just a short while ago. We made reference, for instance, to the second transition document. And what obviously is clear from that document is that the ANC is saying, or at least the authors are saying, well, over the past 18 years, we focused on the politics and not on the economics, at least not enough on the economics.
Look, no, I mean, there's no contradiction in saying there has been some fault lines in relation to what has happened over the past 18 years in relation to poverty, unemployment, and also transforming the economy to ensure that it reflects the demographics of this country. Those are still challenges we face, and another point we can agree on: the still uncoordinated a response to small and medium enterprises, which I think one of the decisions we need to come up here is a coordinated approach in relation to small and medium enterprises. Because
again, if you look at the suggested solutions through some of the documents that have been put out, of course, including the SIMS document and the document on DFIs and the SOCs, you get a sense that people are actually feeling that we need some radical intervention here. That is why then there is a suggestion that the state should be a lot more involved. That may be the answer to a question that over the past 18 years, nothing much has happened. I mean, there's no doubt in some of these documents, there's a critical, if you look across all of them, an implication that we should, as a state, get more and more involved and not allow the things for market solution. And that's it. It has always been in the ANC position. And the questions, the good thing about these documents are beginning to craft what kind of interventions, not in general terms. Sure. Let me bring you back again then, Lebohang, because my issue here is that perhaps the analysis is not telling us exactly what people are feeling on the ground. Because if you look again at the responses in the form of these documents, you get a sense that people want a lot more involvement of the state, which is, for lack of a better word, a radical response. Does that mean that the 18 years then have not been helpful?
Well, basically, we have had the government has chosen a laissez-faire, to follow a laissez-faire mixed economic model, which means that there's a preponderance on creating an enabling environment for business and for foreign direct investment. But what we have not managed to do very effectively is to quantify what this investment entails and how then it begins to translate into economic growth. And I think that the mantra around jobless growth is one that has beset government for the last 18 years. There have been some sterling moments in terms of being able to keep the economy at an even keel. But I think that the fact that there is social inequality has grown, and the Gini coefficient in South Africa, as we're aware, is the largest in the world, which is basically the gap between the richest and the poor. And it's the largest, and it's larger than it was before 1994. And these are facts that really cannot be ignored. As well as some of the inflation, the instruments that we've chosen to use, such as inflation targeting. There's certainly a school of thought that suggests that that alone cannot be the only way of measuring the efficacy of fiscal policy. There are things that one can target, such as, for example, mortality targeting, education targeting, employment targeting, to measure the health and the well-being of the economy. An economy which has not been able to produce sufficient jobs, and has what we call a surplus labor force, which is a whole group and generation of people who are unskilled or unmatched to participate in the current economy, and that there's an accrual of these surplus people over many years now. Every year there are matriculants and university graduates who join the ranks of the unemployed, and these ranks of the unemployed also includes people who have been excluded from the economic participation because of their skills lack, because these are the people who are working in the mines and working in sectors which have since shrunk. So there's a whole structural problem which really needs to be attacked much more vigorously, and certainly we need to see much more state intervention being tangible in people's lives.
That's a very interesting one. Then state involvement, Mr. Kodongwana, is that where the ANC is headed, clearly looking at these documents?
Clearly, we manage the state. There's no doubt that there's going to be a focus in that direction. But let me, before doing that, just highlight one thing. Masita says is focus on inflation targeting alone. I think that has been a debate, and that debate was resolved in 2010 when the mandate of the Reserve Bank by Minister Pravin Gordhan was extended to include all other indicators, include employment. So in that sense, there's a change. Also, what we want also to clarify in relation to this, some of the sectors that have substantial reduced employment, and that thing is not only started after 1994. If you look at the mining in the agriculture, for instance, we had about 2 million people in 1975. By 1995, that number has shrunk to about 900,000. So over a 20-year period, what we're inheriting is in fact an economy which was reflecting structural crisis, and those are some of the things we've got to battle with. But coming to your point, there's definitely going to be a direction in where the state has got to play an active role in a number of sectors. Sims document relates to that. The land and reform, rural development and land and reform document talks about how we should move in a manner which will speed in land reform. So clearly there's a demand from the ground, from a membership for that kind of direction.
Sure, and again, some headlines today talking about investors keeping a very sharp eye on the bigger state role. Part of the reason, let
me just say, Kloran, this thing is a scarecrow. Indonesia last month has imposed a flat 20% export tax on a number of about 14 commodities, and is actually intending to ban export on a number of them by 2014. They want industry to make sure that they develop plans to refine minerals in Indonesia. So throughout the world, there is the push for minerals to benefit the society, national resources to benefit their own society.
Sure,
so but why not accept substitution? Why? This is a scarecrow to say that it's only a South African phenomenon.
No, but what I'm saying is, yes, it could be happening, and it is happening all over the world, including Australia. I think there are some
going to run
measures
away from South Africa. Where are they going to get other minerals? Because all other people who have got minerals
are doing the same thing. But you see, there's also this issue of the efficiency of the state, because that you cannot say that because it's happening in Indonesia, then their state is as efficient as our state. That's the critical question. If the state gets involved, will the state be efficient?
No, that's a perennial question. If you look at our resolve in Polokwane in the economic transformation, it's one of the questions we need to confront head on. we must concede it's a perennial problem. We said in Pulwana, we've made all the nice policies. We've got a state that doesn't have the capacity to do a number of things. Clearly, we must move out of this conference with a clear direction as to how are we going to make sure that we can get an efficient state that can, in which the National Development Plan calls a capable state.
But also, there's a broad question here, and I think Lebohang touched on it, and we hear it often by ANC politicians, the issue of the structural deficiencies of this economy. If you were to answer somebody that says, well, how do these documents intend to tackle those structural problems within our economy? How would you answer that?
Look, if you can look, for the first time that in our conference we've got about 4 documents talking on a number of things. If we were to include the communications one, the 5 documents which talk to transforming the structural problems of this economy, the land reform issues, intervention, how you structure your mining, your national resources, you get into a whole range of in relation to communication, how to achieve competitiveness and broadband and those kind of things. So there's a whole range of interventions which are being proposed to change the structure of this economy.
But you see, whilst those proposals are being made, and I was looking at some of these documents, you say, for instance, that you need to balance addressing inequalities, monopolistic ownership, while encouraging investment and growth, and that means there is a difficulty in being upright about the policy positions that the ANC is taking, because at the same time you've got this worry about, hey, will we get investments coming in? Will the economy continue to grow?
I don't think. There may be some people who are basically cautious about our policy positions. Unfortunately, I'm not. I'm straightforward. And I don't think this economy is not going to have it's going to have a problem of investment, because the policies we've pursued are not policies that are specifically unique to South Africa.
Yeah, but the issue about it is the 18 years.
And you get investment in those economies despite that.
Oh, okay, all right. Do you share the same sentiment, Lebohang?
I think that there's some specificities in the South African economy, which my brother has alluded to, which need a particular intervention, which is linked to kind of the geo-historical political context that I think we've framed quite clearly, but also linked to our current context. Our current context is that, unlike many countries, we have massive unemployment, which must be resolved. We have massive social inequality. We also have skills gaps. We also have an education sector which is reproducing inequality rather than reproducing qualitative citizens who are able to compete. We also need to redefine and rethink the models of foreign direct investment. I have nothing against foreign direct investment, but I think that the kind of investment that needs to be embedded in a local economy, linked to skills transference, linked to job growth, linked to human, respect for human and labor rights, linked to respect for climate protocols, and also linked to a longitudinal plan that places South Africa at a particular path. Is a sort of investment that we need to be thinking of and need to be pursuing far more vigorously. Sure. I think that we also cannot behave as though our country is amorphous and amorphously led. There are a series of choices and policy choices that we have embarked upon, some of them with positive results and some with less positive results, and we need to really begin to regroup and think much more clearly about targeted employment, targeted infrastructure, thinking about sectors, for example, being protective around sectors which are labor absorbent, which absorb people who are the most disadvantaged, black women, for example, lower skilled people. We need to be much more protective of those sectors, which is how our Indonesians and our so-called Asian tigers achieve the kind of growth that they have. They did so by being statist and having a lot of intervention, and also by protecting their sectors until they were able to be more competitive. Also by, playing with things around taxes and tariffs to enable local producers to import at less and to export at lesser costs as well.
Sure.
And making a differentiation between your local producers and your larger foreign producers, because surely we cannot charge our local small businesses, speaking of SMMEs, the small kinds of overheads that it makes to run a business successfully and effectively.
All right. You know what? Very important points you've made, Lebohang. What I'm going to do, let me take a commercial break. When I come back, I'm going to ask Mr. Godongwana to respond to these, because these are pretty important. We are different. It may very well be that the Indonesians are obviously talking about taxes as well in the mineral sector, but they have different mandates. They have different problems compared to us. How then do we deal with our specific problems? That coming up in a minute.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Right, I'm continuing, by the way, taking your SMSs at 34701, emails at gwalax@sabc.co.za. I'll go to the lines after all the updates. But for now, let me ask Mr. Godongwana to respond to the points that were made by Lebohang earlier on.
Let me just say, Lebohang, I concur with, she makes an important point. And that point is we've got to make policy choices. And that's what the conference is about. In making those policy choices is to say, I use the term change and continuity. Change those things that are not working right, consolidate those areas where we're doing well. So those are the policy choices we're beginning to make here. And then I think I agree entirely with her. And therefore have sectoral approaches. That's why I'm saying for the first time we've got about 5 documents zooming down on some of the economic areas with a special focus. So I think that's, and I would agree with her in that direction.
But you see, the point I was trying to raise is that comparison you made, that, you know, the issues around the minerals is happening all over the world, but the problems are not similar. The mines, for instance, in this country have a requirement to raise the uptake of the employers and so on, perhaps, which is slightly different from what they would have in Malaysia.
You know, I was listening to David Rhodes this morning. Mm-hmm. And talking about labor competitiveness and other things. Let me just tell you, 97% of platinum is in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Who are we competing with? Now, so yes, we've got to say what are the areas where we are weak on the minerals, or the areas where we're strong. Obviously, in areas like gold, we are in a weaker position at the moment, precisely because the reserves are small, and at the same time the cost of extraction because of deep mining are becoming more expensive. So yeah, indeed, we even in mining we'll have to have that sectoral approach. We take those issues into account.
Just a very quick one on the platinum, because we discussed it last week here on the program, and somebody raised a conspiracy theory about the crisis there, suggesting that the reason why this crisis comes up at this particular moment is to put pressure on that conference so that decisions will be made around issues of platinum. Do you buy that?
No, I don't buy that. If whatever they do, we're going to discuss, and the key question which is emerging in this discussion, even from our provinces, we've got to define what we call strategic minerals and our policy choice in that direction. And that I'm quite confident that's what conference is likely to say.
Okay.
So we're not going to go full bang and look at each and every. There are differences, as I've indicated. For instance, we're not going to treat gold in the same way as we're going to treat platinum.
Okay. All right.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
We're talking about the ANC's 4th National Policy Conference. It's taking place at Galaga Estate in Midrand. And, of course, a critical element of that, economic policies of this country going forward. And we're taking your thoughts on these matters. Remember my guests in our Midrand studio there, Enoch Godongwana. He's a member of the ANC's National Executive Committee, but also he's a member of the Economic Transformation Committee of the ANC. I'm also joined by Lebohang Pheko, a policy and economic analyst, also joining us from the Midrand studios. Let me read emails and then go to the calls. Lots of emails have come through for us this morning. Perhaps let me start with the SMSs. Carl says, is the total number of South Africa's present shack dwellers, okay, what is the total number of South Africa's present shack dwellers in comparison with 1990? Is it higher or lower or the same? I'm not sure if any of my guests will have an answer for that. But Khan also has an SMS here that says, is there not supposed to be public or some sort of stakeholder consultation on those policies before this discussion? That's a question there from Khan. We'll ask Mr. Godongwana to explain the process leading up to this discussion, 4-day discussion starting today. Olani in Cape Town says, Comrade Enoch, how do we manage the negative conflict of interests in this policy formulation process so that it is not hijacked? That's a comment from Cape Town. Another one says, Manuel is the de facto structural adjustment officer on behalf of the IMF and the World Bank, overseeing ANC capitalistic policy. So conference is just a talk shop. Nothing will change. That's Joe. Another SMS. How can you expect an uneducated majority to control the economy? If the corrupt ANC is involved, they will steal everything. That SMS is not signed. It came through on the lines. Eddie says the ANC has steered the ship successfully. It's a question mark. And then it says, what? Onto the rocks of destruction. Is it the ANC is destroying the best land in Africa? That's an SMS from Eddie. Mark in Cape Town says, SAA, Transnet, Eskom, Land Bank all run at a loss. Now they want to run and ruin the mines too. And how will that increase employment? That's an SMS from Mark in Cape Town. Let me read one or two emails and get responses. Then there is an email from this one from Osiba Art is very long. I'll just read perhaps one or two paragraphs. First paragraphs. It says the planet's two major problems are population growth and reliance on cheap power. Population growth is the most rapid in developing countries and in countries with a generally low level of education. In fact, the low level of education contributes to population growth as poor households are not able to provide their children with the mental stimulation that their developing brains require before they enter formal schooling. As a consequence, they are likely to drop out of school early and perpetuate the cycle by starting families that they cannot educate and hold that their survival depends upon having a large family. Secondly, the fuel price has crept up on us and we have adjusted to the small increments in cost, unlike the price of electricity that shot up alarmingly. It's a long email, but I'll just leave it at that. That's a view from Usiba Art on email. There's also Bukhosi in Kelvin who says the biggest blunder the ANC government made was to neglect education of our children effectively and constructively. For China to be where it is, they first developed artisans, scientists and research facilities to drive their economy. Now, because of a lack of skills in this country, we export our resources for other countries to manufacture finished goods that we buy at a higher price. Secondly, corporate South Africa are hypocrites. Implats has alluded to part nationalization in Zimbabwe, and so does De Beers in Botswana, 50% grow or government owned. Why is nationalization when it comes to us becoming taboo? Litseng Diamonds in Lesotho is also 30% government owned and 70% mine owned. The problem with the ANC is to compromise and compromise like it did at Codesa to the detriment of black people in this country. Bukhosi in Kelvin. All right, let me get some answers then, Mr. Godongwana.
Look, there's quite a number of these things. I didn't take note of all of them. Let me just take a couple of them. In Sheikh dollars, the number has not changed because the way in which there was about 2 million Sheikh dollars, I think we still have about, despite building about 2 million houses, and what is causing that is a normal process of migration. And that migration changes pattern. For instance, by 1994, the province with a bigger population was KZN. As we speak, Gauteng has got the bigger population than any other province. That's the process of normal migration. So we need to plan for that quite effectively. A number of issues. It is incorrect to say all these state-owned enterprises are in fact running at a loss. To mentioning Transnet, now Transnet is embarking for a 300 billion rand program. Why is someone says that they're running at a loss? It's just the issue we've got to take into account is the issue of skills. It's a fundamental problem because unless we get artisan and change the mentality among South Africans that not everything skill is a university degree. We've got to get the proper training and artisans in place, and I think Mr. Nzimande's heart is in the right place, is working hard to change that phenomenon. We've had a situation in the past. South African artisans had largely trained by parastatals. When they were privatized and commercialized, that issue created a huge gap in the vocational training system in this country. And I think they were beginning, this matter is being addressed at the moment.
Okay, all right. Lebohang will pick up on some of the comments as well in a minute, but let me go to Funani in East London, who's been on the line for a while. I thank you for holding for me. Funani, good morning.
Yes, morning, Kolani.
Hi.
You know, the first thing I want to say, Mr. Kodongwana for me is really not a good speaker. He's not a good articulator on this thing. First and foremost,
Why is that?
The 15-year review released by the ANC with Joel Nechitenzo told us that poverty, inequality, and unemployment is increasing. Read IDP of every municipality saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. The 15-year review compared to the time that the ANC was in power, comparing it to before. So what we notice is that under apartheid, the levels of poverty, Mepeku talks about education. Education was somehow better then than now. And as a result, there were people who were able to get into jobs. There were forms of development that enabled people to get skills. That is no longer there. Whatever that is there is not able to absorb people. Now, Utatu Kotongwana says the ANC is steering the country to a right direction. Why shouldn't we ask what is that right direction? Because what we realize with the lives of our people, he talks about migration. What is the pattern of migration? People leave the so-called former Bantustan areas or the homelands, go to urban areas where white people did a lot of infrastructure development. So what the ANC found either collapsed it or left it unchanged. So in areas where there was no development, there is no development. So where's the ANC taking us? They talk about the second transition. What is that second transition? In the view of many of us, second transition can only be about the removal of the ANC, because as the things stand, we continue as a people to go down the drain with the ANC, because they're also not succeeding. They're also going down the drain. So we cannot be dragged by them down the drain.
All right, Funani in East London. Let me get Mr. Godongwana to respond to that critique. Mr. Godongwana?
No. Mr. Funan is entitled to hold a view. This is a democratic society. And I concur with if he holds a view that the best way is to remove the ANC. 2014 is coming. That's what he should do. But let me say, part of what he's talking about, migration is normal in any society. It's not only a South African phenomenon. Lagos, according to statistics, is likely to grow into one of the top 20 cities in the world precisely because of migration.
Yeah.
So it's not something, a phenomenon unique to South Africa. It is true that people go to where the development is. Let me just give you an indication. In South Africa, this migration was stopped through influx control. When the influx control was removed, migration was faster. For instance, the African population in the Eastern Cape, in the Western, grew by 46% between 1996 and 2001. Is there instead South Africa? So we had a process of artificial stopping what is normal in any other society through the influx control. So migration is happening in South Africa.
But I wanted to talk to some of the facts then, and he's got his own opinion, but he may be factual in going back to the 15-year review that was released by Mr. Nechitenzo.
That review says a couple of things, which is I'm not so I agree with it. It says we have reduced absolute poverty. That's what it says. Absolute poverty has been reduced, but although inequality has been growing, inequality is likely to grow precisely because we've got a structure of the economy where white South Africa had a European standard. We have got black South African which had an African standard. Through different interventions, affirmative action and other things, people are moving into the same standards as white South Africans and therefore creating an income inequality. That we accept, but absolute poverty, that study says we've reduced absolute poverty.
All right. Lebohang, you want to come in?
I mean, I think, in terms of the second transition and the two economies that my colleague has mentioned, where the policy gaps are is the ability to bridge these inequalities. And I think that's probably particularly, again, to do with the policy choices that we have taken over the past 18 years. Again, there needs to be a deliberateness. We're very good at diagnosing and naming and identifying the problem, but there certainly seems to be much more rigor and deliberateness and consistency in dealing with these issues. Countries such as China, for example, and again, we look east yet again in this conversation. But I mean, countries such as that, they have 50-year plans, 100-year plans. Countries like Japan, we, put in place policies and discard them after 3 to 5 years, perhaps 10 years. It's difficult to even begin to embed a growth model that is identifiable and that is sustainable with all of this flux. Another issue as well is the notion of perceptions management. I think one of the SMSs talked about that the misuse of state-owned enterprises and parastatals, or the mismanagement perhaps. And I think that the notion of perceptions management is extremely important, because there certainly has been a plethora in the media, a plethora of reports around how these state-owned institutions are being run, how they're being managed. Allegations, some of them quite serious, and some of them even prosecuted in court in terms of corruption and embezzling of funds. And I think that the public has got a very low appetite, now more so than at any other point, for the notion that political heads and state-owned enterprises are running at a loss, or being seen to run at a loss, or are being inefficient, when in fact these are institutions which are supposed to steer the development agenda.
Sorry to interrupt you, because I wanted to come back to the point you made about us being good at diagnosing and so on. But you see, there's something very interesting for me, because how often do you hear people say, well, South Africa has some of the best policies, the issue is implementation. So when the ANC then gathers to discuss these policies, what does that mean? Does it mean that they are not actually as best as we've been told before?
I think that some of the policies have elements of brilliance, but certainly in terms of then being able to translate those elements of brilliance into jobs, into employment, into reduction of social inequality, which is very critical. I don't think that it's sufficient to say that the growing black middle class is the reason that the inequality is growing, because that implies that whilst there's a growing black middle class, there's a whole underclass which is being left behind, and which is remaining behind, which goes back to the point that I made, that we seem to be reproducing inequality. After 18 years, that cannot be acceptable, particularly because this inequality has grown since 1994. Right. And I think that these are points that certainly that I hope that this conference is going to be able to speak to.
All right. Let me read some emails here, Mr. Kotongwana. There's one from Charles Mutuludi who says, the effective policy change we need in this country is to introduce free quality education first, radically implement indigenization laws that will deal directly with wealth sharing, and also take our youth to military conscription for moral regeneration and skills development projects. Simple as that. That's Charles Mutuludi. But also he has an email from Yaj, and Yaj is with the South Africa or SA New Economics Network. Says we need not nationalize everything like the mines, but we do need to make some fundamental changes as far as tax reform and transformation of the banking sector is concerned. Firstly, we need to replace income tax and VAT with the financial transactions tax on all transactions and land tax. Secondly, we need the rapid establishment of a public bank of the deposit-taking kind, or by nationalizing one of the major banks such as ABSA to generate savings and capital for productive investment in renewable energy sector, local manufacturing and organic agriculture. Thirdly, government should be able to borrow money directly from the Reserve Bank, interest-free and debt-free, for spending on essential infrastructure and essential services such as health and education, as well as universal basic income. Just on those two, what would your response be, Mr. Kotongwana?
On the free, education, quality education, that matter is up for discussion in conference. For instance, the SIMS report is proposing free education for maths and science up at all levels. I'm saying that matter is up for discussion. We await the outcome of conference with interest. The one issue, we need to ask ourselves, if you are saying, let me use a particular instrument, you must ask, what am I trying to solve? Is that instrument the appropriate instrument? And for instance, if there's a discussion again around the banks, the issue of the post bank being of a deposit-taking institution is up for discussion in this conference. I don't know what the outcome will be.
All right. Let me read some SMSs. There's Dr. Jeff Howes, I think it is, who says, as long as population growth exceeds GDP, South Africa will have fewer jobs and get poorer per capita. Also, another SMS says, your guest is misinformed. There are 2 million households in shacks and over 6 million shack dwellers. More than 10% of the population all are in Johannesburg. Let me take some calls. Gerald in Durban, good morning.
Yeah, I just want to comment, again, the issue is, it doesn't matter what policies you got to have quality leadership to implement any policy. Now, firstly, the ANC need to reflect at that Congress to see how many members are sitting at that Congress talking about policies and implementation of policies that are facing corruption charges. I mean, John Block is there, the senior leadership of the KZN ANC branch is there. Most of them are facing some sort of corruption charges. So firstly, they need to get rid of those kind of people, because many of these people are in politics for the wrong reasons, not to implement policy, but for self-enrichment. And you only need to walk out into the car park there at Gallagher Estates and look at the vehicles that ordinary civil servants are driving. Range Rovers, 1.2 million rand.
How do you know that? How do you know that, Gerald?
Promising a better life for all.
Gerald, how do you know that? You haven't been there.
Well, let me tell you now, I can guarantee you they're Range Rovers there. I can guarantee you that. Those are the ones that fly past me on the highway every second day.
Okay. All right, let's get Mr. Godongwana to respond. Leadership?
Look, there's no doubt that leadership has got impact. There's no question about that. We've got this exchange program with the Chinese. One of the essence what they said is that leadership is critical. They themselves have led that country and messed it up for 30 years. That's what they were telling us. But after a change of leadership, our approach on leadership has had an impact on the Chinese. There's no doubt about that. But it is incorrect to assume that everybody who's ANC is corrupt. I think that's incorrect. The majority of those people are ordinary South African citizens who are sitting here. Of the 4,000 delegates here, the majority of them are desperate, want to see SR change South Africa, and have committed their lives to making that South Africa is a better place to live in. To the extent that there may be one or two people who are charged, does not necessarily mean everybody in this conference is like that.
All right, more emails. There's one from Dinigo who says, this so-called second transition is a fictitious segmentation. Any normal society is characterized by what are intrinsically intertwined dynamics of the political, environment, economic, legal, social, cultural, technological, and indeed the global elements at play with each other. So what's next in this bogus pigeonholing of transitions? The judiciary or social elements, societal developmental and transformation cannot be segmented into neat epochs. That's an interesting one, because again, I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Godongwana here, because there is a worry that the bigger part of this conference will be debating politics of the ANC and using such things such as second transition as a proxy for discussing leadership in Mangaung.
Look, it can be a proxy for discussing leadership in Mangaung. The rationale for creating a policy conference, when we moved from annual conferences to a 5-year period, we introduced two other things. The first one was the National General Council, which is a mid-term review, and the policy conference, which precedes the conference itself. And the rationale for that is to ensure that we debate policy free from the canvassing and those kind of things, which also creates tension. So this is not a proxy for Mangaung at all.
All right, I'm going to ask Lebohang to make a comment around that, but let me take Janusz first in from Cape Town. Hello, Janusz.
Hi, Kalani, and to your panel. Many well-educated engineers, professors, doctors, and other technicians left our country because of the specific situation in our country. I'm calling this affirmative action, and we lost so many of them, and every day we're losing. Those people who are left us, they are working for the international company who coming back to us and producing manufacturing products and selling to us. The ANC should take under consideration to abolishment of affirmative action and start to building our nation as a one nation. I'll give you an example. You are the soccer fan, Kolani, as I know. And 1996, we all participate in the African Cup, and we won it. There were no racism, anything like that. Now we are separated. We are losing the people who could help us.
Okay.
If ANC could do something about it,
all right.
then
Janusz?
destroy the affirmative action, because this dividing us and not allowing us to go ahead.
All right, Janusz in Cape Town. Mr. Kotongwana?
Look, I don't buy that argument. Skilled people are competitive. They are taken by different economy. I mean, we've got black nurses which are taken by the British. We've got and black engineers which are taken by foreign companies. So skilled people are poached by by those who can pay better. It's got nothing to do with affirmative action. There's no way you can say in a society which has been cast in a racial mold, you can't use race to redress the imbalances of the party. That cannot be accepted.
An email from Denzel says, besides measures to drastically improve health and education and support SMEs, I believe land redistribution is key. But let's make it an honest debate for a change and include private ownership and formalization of tribal land. At the moment, this gets conveniently left out of the discussion and land is never included in the stats. Talking about the issues of honesty, Lebohang, what are you expecting out of this discussion? I mentioned that already some people are saying that documents such as the second transition may be used as a proxy here for leadership choices, in a sense that people will say, well, if you support it, then it means you support this faction, and if you don't support it, then it means you're with those people.
I mean, I think that some of the leadership debates are unavoidable, and I don't suppose that there's several delegates here who probably have an interest in voicing them in some kind of way. I think it's also very difficult and slightly disingenuous to discuss economic debates and economic transformation without dealing with how we're going to lead and manage that transformation. That needs people and skills and integrity and all of the things that are very critical. I also think that certainly, again, it goes back to the notion of perceptions and the notion of that we need to then begin to define and redefine what this second transition is. Transitioning from what to what? Some people would argue that the first transition, as it were, is not really finished. And what was it? What are the benchmarks and what are the key milestones of it? And the second transitions would imply that certain benchmarks and certain socio-economic indicators have been met. For example, full employment or free education, or that there's a certain level of that graduates are now being absorbed into the economy, and that some of the structural issues that we have discussed and that we have diagnosed, as we do so very well in South Africa, have then been dealt with. But what are we transitioning to? And it also seems to be a bit of I think the concern when the second transition was first mooted was that, of course, it seems to be not only a proxy for leadership debates, but certainly a proxy to discuss some very problematic issues around constitutional reform and judicial review, which some people find slightly difficult and untimely.
Just, Mr. Kotongwana, a quick comment?
Look, one of the things we should avoid is to be trapped in this discussing a conceptual formulation called the second transition, rather than the substantive issues that the document focuses on. And I think the document focuses on that one of the key challenges, given the levels of unemployment, poverty, the key focus moving forward should be on focusing on economic transformation. And that should be the debate, and what kind of transformation we should be talking about, rather than be trapped on this notion of a second transition.
Unfortunately, I've got to wrap it up at this time. I see there is a lot. I'm getting a lot of emails about second transition. It's an issue that obviously in the next 3 days or so we'll be discussing thoroughly here on the program. We just thought that today it would be fair to start with the broader economic issues and some of the issues that people are raising as concerns. I thank my guest, though, for staying with us for the hour. Enoch Kotongwana, a member of the ANC's National Executive Committee and also a member of the Economic Transformation Committee. Lebohang Pheko is a policy and economic analyst. I thank you very much for your insights here. I thank the team who put it all together for us. It's 9 o'clock now. We go to the newsroom for the latest news update, and of course afterwards it's Morning Talk here on SAFM. 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 Morning Talk here.